Welcome to another episode. Today I'm talking with Federico Faggin. Federico trained as a physicist and then spent many years working in technology, leading the development of the first commercial microprocessor, and then had an experience which made him rethink or re-experience consciousness in a new light. And then for the last sort of 30 years, he's been putting forward this framework. And then more recently with a physicist called Dariano, essentially it postulates that consciousness is a postulate, it's fundamental, and that the world in which we perceive is symbolic. And so the meaning, semantic space is consciousness, and that words, matter is all symbols used by what he refers to as Seities or conscious entities to communicate. It very much is reminiscent of work of like people like Schopenhauer, but also, lines of thought we find in the Vedas and things. For example, prana is prior to Namarupa, which is energy or consciousness, is prior to name and form, which is found in the Upanishads. Yeah, so if you enjoy this conversation, yeah, enjoy it. Welcome, Federico.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So, I've sort of introduced you, Federico, prior to this, in so people be somewhat familiar. For those who haven't, maybe if this is the first time hearing you or yeah, encountering you, there is this book which you it's called Irreducible. I think you published it. What was it, about a couple of years ago, a year ago?
In Italy, yes. In English, only 6 months ago, 7 months ago. Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, and so for anyone, yeah, who hears this and enjoys the conversation, I do recommend the book. It's very detailed and it's wonderful because it sort of also includes your own sort of trajectory and the sort of your the framework that you put forward. It's well, I suppose because it is an experience, it's a framework which is very much rooted in experience. It's almost like, well, how could it not draw upon your own experiences? um it has many quotes in it which I really enjoyed, um and one of them is words like nature half reveal and half conceal the soul within, which is Tennyson. Um, so yeah, words like nature half reveal and half conceal the soul within. And I thought I could have probably found another one, but I thought out of the quotes, to me, that really sort of captures your framework. And so then thinking about, yeah, how that relates to your perspective on life. If someone had, because like I say, in your book, you speak about your journey. If you'd heard that quote, maybe in 19, I don't know, 85 or prior to, that night in, I think it was Lake Tahoe or somewhere like that. How do you think you would have heard that quote? Do you think it would have landed completely differently to now? So yeah. What do you think of that?
I think so. I think that I could not have understood it completely because only when you have a direct experience of consciousness, which gives you a completely different way of knowing, you know because you experience directly what you know, which of course in some ways is what we do. But when we study, we are really, that what we learn, what we know, is indirect experience, is through indirect experience, and therefore, unless we have a true understanding of what we read, we kind of have a superficial, comprehension, and so you cannot understand deeper kind of quotes, for example, because they kind of they make sense, but you don't get the depth of it because you
Mm,
don't have that understanding yet. In other words, the meaning that we get from information comes before the symbolic aspect that carries the information, the symbols. So we can only get what we already know, something that is very close to what we already know.
Yes.
And that's important, because we tend to think that that information carries naturally all the meaning that information is supposed to carry. That's not true at all. Information is just symbols, and those symbols are simply pointers. They point to meaning, and if you don't have meaning already that is close to what the symbols are, intend, then you cannot get it. For example, this happens even with simple things like the taste of food, for example. If I describe to you the taste of an exotic fruit that you never tasted, you cannot reconstruct that in your experience. You simply, you hear the words, it makes sense and kind of interesting, but until you taste that exotic food, you don't know what I'm talking about.
Yes, 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 yes. And so, yeah, and so, as I referenced there, and you speak about it, and you've spoken about it many times on different podcasts and stuff as well. I suppose, yeah. So you had an experience. I think was it around 1990, and
Yes.
just for people listening, how did that sort of pivot or shift? How I suppose, yeah, everything almost. And so
Well,
prior to it, would it be fair to say that you were, in a sense, implicitly a materialist? You sort of consciousness was not really something. Your understanding of consciousness was perhaps impoverished or something, and this experience changed things.
yes. Well, before that experience, I've actually understood that the the consciousness was actually not understood at all by, for example, neuroscientists that were describing, what happens in the brain when you smell a flower, for example. They describe electrical signals or biochemical signals, and without saying so, they imply that the smell of that flower is equivalent or is identical to those electrical signals, which is not the
Mm.
case at all. And so, that happened to me when I was studying neuroscience and the biology in the late 80s, because I was developing neural networks and I wanted to understand how the brain works. And at one point, I asked myself, "But wait a second! These books talk about what I know because I experience, and they talk as if the brain has signals in the brain. Those two things are not the same." So I discover what Chalmers later wrote about the our problem of consciousness, calling it the our problem of consciousness, and used the word qualia to designate what something feels, what an experience feels like, and that's that feeling, these sensations and feelings that we sense within ourselves, that carry the meaning, carry the fundamental information that is intended for us to know. We cannot know consciously if we don't have qualia, and so the fact that the brain has electrical signals doesn't mean that those electrical signals are the sensations and feelings that you feel. And that's exactly the problem that is open, and that over the last 30 years I'm trying to find solutions. And in fact, I have a theory together with Professor Dariano that explains that qualia are quantum phenomena, but we can get to that later. But the point is that in my experience at that time was still intellectual, because I had not had the transformative experience that I had few years, a couple of years later or years later from that point, which was in 1990. You alluded to it. So I say it because I think otherwise I'm speaking of something that people don't have any sense of what I'm talking about. So I was during the holidays, the Christmas holidays in 1990. We had a home in Tahoe, Lake Tahoe, skiing with the family, and so it was a very, very, very good period for me. It was the only vacation that I was taking at that time. I was running a company, so I was very, very busy. And one night I woke up in the middle of the night, midnight or so, and I was thirsty. I went to get a glass of water in the kitchen. And then when I went back to bed, I was just quieting myself to fall asleep. But before I fell asleep, even before the hypnagogic state, I feel this energy coming out of me. Is rushing energy, but it's not an imagination. It's actual physical energy. But this physical energy is my conscious energy that feels like love. It's a love more powerful than anything that I've ever felt, but by orders of magnitude. And it is love mixed with joy and mixed with peace. And peace I never felt before. Peace was recognizing that I was this thing that was coming out of me. I am this. I was at home finally. I was always restless. I was never where I was. And this gave the sense of I am this. Also, my consciousness being in this energy was part of it. But for me, the mind-boggling thing was that I was the source of love. How can I be the source of love? I mean, love somehow was something that you get from others. I never kind of thought of love that way, as an energy, as a force, and also mixed with joy and with peace. And so, but this didn't stop here. So this energy now, which was a white scintillating light, my body was hot. It was also, vibrating. So the vibration seems to be synchronous with these flashing lights, but who knows? I never made a measurement to be able to tell that. And then this energy explodes and fills the entire space, the entire perceptual space, and my consciousness is there now. So now I'm observing something that normally is outside of me. I'm an observer of the world that is the observer. So I'm both an observer and observed. Again, something that boggled my mind. What's going on? And at the same time now, or around, about the same time, a thought forms, and this thought is, wow, this is what everything is made of. This is what this is the stuff, the energy, the substance of which the entire world is made of, like an intuition. And before, and I also recognize that before giving mental words to that intuition, there was a flash of insight, that preceded, the mental verbalization of what that flash of insight meant or was intended to convey. So there was this moment of detachment between the image, which was, it's not words, it's not even numbers, and the words that are capturing the essence or what could be captured of that image. So that was the experience. And because before I was materialistic, I thought that I'm the body, and when the body dies, that's the end of me and the end of us. And I had accepted the view of scientism because science has never proven that, but the scientism says so, and I had accepted that. So after that experience, that could no longer be true. How can the world disappear or cease to exist? I was no longer the body. I was also the body, but I was more than the body. So that experience immediately changed my perspective of who I am. And that change was so powerful, and it had the, it carried its own truth, the sense that it cannot be but this way, even if I cannot explain how, is actually, in fact, the fact these type of experiences are, in fact, taking you down a path of understanding. You want to understand why is that so, but you know that it is so. So again, it's like when I make an invention, I have the idea of what I want, and then I have to work 3 years to make it work. So the same thing, but I know that it will work. So this is the type of knowing that we are capable of, but that I never had experience before, except for inventions. But that was kind of, it was it was not the same. It didn't carry the same weight as this experience. And that experience changed my life. I could no longer go back to the older way of kind of looking at things. You know, uh, the scientism was useful to describe how a computer works, or how things in the space and time interact, but that was not sufficient to go beyond that. And so that experience revealed that there is a world that we don't know, something that is more than the senses, our senses can perceive. And that was the beginning of a new life, what I call my fourth life at that time. in my other book, Silicon, which is an autobiography.
It's really interesting you said the beginning of my new life, and we can pick up on it later at a different point, but that because it speaks to that, yeah, this idea of being reborn. And whilst you how would you say, I think your work is the sort of hmm, the marrying, or the kind of uh one of the implications of it, and I think you speak to, is this idea of how we've split science and spirituality, and at least you put the question mark around, well, does that have to be the case? Or anyway, but this idea, just sticking with the sort, yeah, sorry, following on from your point there, yeah, it's amazing what you speak of in terms of the way in which the experience, you know, changed the trajectory of your life. It actually changed it was that powerful. And it also, I don't know if you've read his book, but it's funny, the experience you had, it's so, I'm not saying it was the same as, but it kind of reminds me of In the Power of Now. Eckhart Tolle talks about this experience he had where he was just sort of propelled into kind of this I suppose, new world almost. And it sounds like in some ways that's the experience you had. And I wonder, in a way, it sounds, well, it does. It sounds very much just like a kind of the non-duality which is spoken about in many of the kind of, like the Vedas and the Upanishads, where the observer and the observed is sort of that breaks down almost. Um, so when you had this experience, I mean, did you speak to people about it? Did you just have to like then go back into because you're working in companies? Did you just have to sort of like get back into the 9 to 5, or I'm sure it was more than 9 to 5? Imagine as running a company, it was probably 9 to 12 or whatever. But and then just sort of like make sense out of this yourself, or were you like then talking to people? Did it make you start reading different, like books and stuff to
No,
try and
I
contextualize
only,
it?
I only told to a friend of mine that I had a sense that it could, it could help me perhaps find someone that could help me. And that was it. And then I found a transpersonal psychologist through, that he knew, that I used to kind of begin to make some sense of it. And transpersonal meaning, some psychologist that doesn't think that we are machines, because if you go to one of those, they tell you that they cannot help you. That you need to go to a psychiatrist that
Yeah, yeah,
can give you a few pills that will take care of
yeah,
that problem. Yeah, which
yeah,
course, the materialistic view of reality. But I realized that this was a life-changing experience, and to make a long story short, it propelled me into a journey of personal exploration through all kinds of different schools of thought, spiritual, psychological, and read lots of different books that I would have never read in the past. But it was through this 20-year process from 1990 to about 2008, 2009, that I reached the conclusion that consciousness and free will, because at some point I realized that consciousness without free will would not make any sense. It would not really, could not operate, the kind of miracle that you need, which is the ability to know yourself. You have to be able to direct your own experience in order to know yourself, and in order to do that, you need to be free to do so. You cannot, you have to have free will, whatever free will means, and some choice about the course of your life. And so, after 20 years, then I realized that, and many extraordinary experiences of consciousness in between, because this was the one that I told you was just the beginning, was just the first one. But many others were as revealing and as incredible, that show aspects of me and reality that I didn't know existed. So I decided to basically find a way to unite science and spirituality. By that time, science was understood by me to be the study of what can be measured, the explaining how the world works as a machine, using mathematics and so on. But spirituality was the fact that we have abilities that go beyond the rational mind. That are intuitive, that can give you a direct proof of what you are experiencing. That what you are experiencing is veridical, true, in the sense that goes beyond what you can prove with mathematics, because mathematics always relies on the assumed veridity of the postulates that you take for good, because you cannot demonstrate the postulate. The postulates are statements that they make sense and you accept as true. And then through the truth of those statements, you can prove consequences through logic. But, as you know, there are also theorems that says that not all statements that you can make about a axiomatic system can actually be proven to be true or false. That's the Gödel's theorem, and those have absolutely cut the legs off the logic positivism that was dominating the science and mathematics up until the 30s, 1930s, when Gödel made those famous proofs. So to me, mathematics did not give me the same sense of truth that I had with those experiences of consciousness. And so basically those experiences reveal a deeper reality, out of which the reality that we can reason about, that we can make measures about in space and time, emerges from. And that's the spiritual reality, the reality of meaning versus the reality of symbols, which is what we can actually talk about, measure in space and time, and deal with. So that was the choice that I made at that time, 2008, 2009, to stop what I was doing and just find a way to unite science and spirituality into a new discipline where the boundaries between the two are no longer visible. There's one, also it was clear that the totality of what exists, had to be holistic, could not be made of separable parts. And the consequences of that idea, which of course goes back to the Vedas, and you find that in old perennial philosophy, the idea that one, the totality of what exists, is one, united, inseparable. There is no, you cannot make pieces out of it. And it is exactly this fact that changes many of the idea of scientism, because the ideas of scientism are basically based on materialism and reductionism, which is the way we understand the classical world of physics, the world of objects that are separate from each other, that interact in space and time. That is the world that our senses are sensible to. They perceive this reality. They cannot perceive elementary particles, because elementary particles do not exist as objects. They are not objects. That's what quantum physics is already saying. And so it was clear that quantum physics had to be fundamental in this understanding of consciousness and free will. But how does it work? Well, I can now tell you how it works after 15 years worth of additional work. And that's the theory that I have with Professor Dariano, which is an authority in the field of quantum information. And this theory simply is saying that consciousness is, in fact, it's not this theory that is saying. We had to the further step that I made about a year ago, even less than a year ago, was that we have to start with consciousness and free will. We cannot explain consciousness and free will with mathematics, because consciousness and free will go beyond what mathematics can describe. Moreover, consciousness is what creates mathematics. So how can the creation of consciousness explain consciousness, right? Impossible. So we have to start with consciousness and free will. So in my third book, which is not in English yet, has been published in Italy about 6 months ago, called Beyond the Invisible, where science and spirituality meet. Actually, no, where science and spirituality unite, meaning they unite, they merge. In fact, probably I will translate as merge, where science and spirituality merge, because I haven't translated it in English yet. I will translate it in English because I'm fluent, obviously, in both languages. So this book, starts with a postulate. The postulate is I call it the postulate of being, and this postulate says one, which is defined as the totality of what exists, is dynamic, holistic, and wants to know itself. So the one that is dynamic and holistic is already the universe described by quantum physics. Dynamic means that the universe is never the same instant after instant. It always changes. It changes continuously. And holistic means that it's not made of separable parts. Everything is interconnected within this universe. I added one wants to know itself. So the wanting is the freedom, the free will, the capacity to direct its own experience of one, and to know itself imply the existence of consciousness, which is the property of one that allows one to know itself, to self-reflect and know itself in this self-reflection. So to me, then, starting with that postulate, you can actually explain why quantum physics must have the crazy properties that everybody says quantum physics has. It has those crazy properties because the reality, the physical reality that is beyond space and time, which is quantum physics, must have the properties of consciousness and free will, which are the following. The experience, our experience, is unique to us, cannot be duplicated, cannot be copied, cannot be reproduced. Well, it happens that the quantum state of a quantum field has exactly those properties. The quantum state of a quantum field has the property that is non-reproducible. It's called the no-cloning theorem. It's a theorem of quantum physics. The second property is that what you can say or what you can measure about the quantum state, which once you say that the quantum field is conscious, are saying and measuring are two aspects of the same thing. But what you can know basically outside of that quantum state that cannot be reproduced can only be one bit of information, classical information, for any quantum bit that describes the state, that represents the state. So a quantum bit is an infinity of states. It can be, you can imagine it as a point on the surface of a sphere. So you have a sphere, every point on the surface of a sphere is one of the possible states of a qubit. But when you make a measurement, you will measure no matter in which direction you move, because that would be a direction in space and time. A qubit could be represented as a direction in space and time. When you make a measurement, you will always find 0 or 1. In other words, one in the direction in which you make the measurement, or 0, which is the opposite direction in which you make the measurement. Same straight line, but one in the verse is, in this direction or the opposite direction. And that's it. So you can only know in other words, translated into, common language, what you can know about what you have within yourself is only a small portion of what you feel or what you know within yourself. Even yourself, I can only say, of the love that I feel, for a person, I can only say very little things about it. If I say I love you, if I say all that I feel, not a chance. Love that I feel has dimensions that impenetrable. In fact, I know that I don't know. How can you know that you don't know? That's because, the way you know carries with it what you know and what you don't know. You know that it is love, but you know that it has depth that you cannot fathom yet. So in a sense, that feeling brings with it the force, the motivation to actually find out. You see, that's why you want to know yourself. Why do you want to know yourself? Because what you know through the feelings is not sufficient to give you, it doesn't give you all the meaning that is contained in those feelings. So that's so the property then of a quantum field, of a quantum state of the quantum field, are exactly the property of our conscious experience. Therefore, we can say that the quantum field is conscious, having the same properties, the same phenomenology. Of course, there's a step further that we make by saying so. That's why it has to be a postulate. But this postulate says something which is very, very obvious, because if there is consciousness, then the physical aspects of reality must reflect the fact that there is consciousness that you have accepted that exists. Why? Because you have an experience of it. So it's self-evident. Any postulate should be self-evident. Well, if you read the postulates of quantum physics, unless you study 5 years, you will not even understand what they're saying. Not self-evident. I mean, you don't understand what the hell are they talking about. So, but when I say the consciousness exists and free will exists, you know that is self-evident even to a child, as long as it has sufficiently understanding of words to understand what you're talking about. But a 5-year-old can understand that there is consciousness and there is a certain level of free will. It can understand that. And that's exactly, what I'm saying. When if you accept that consciousness and free will are so fundamental that the universe must have those properties, then the reality that you can measure that comes out of this one, which is holistic, must have those properties. Otherwise, it would not make any sense. And those properties, and the only reason why those properties are considered by the physicists incomprehensible is because the properties of consciousness and free will are not mathematical properties. They go beyond mathematics.
Mm.
Qualia are not numbers. Anything that we measure in space and time is reconducible to numbers. So
Hmm.
you see, there is, in other words, there is a deeper reality which science for now has not acknowledged yet, out of which what we can measure in space and time, which are classical information, emerges. But there is more to it. That's why we need to go beyond the scientism that presumes that all that exists is what you can measure in space and time, and everything else that you cannot measure is epiphenomenal, meaning it is not a real phenomenon. There is a deeper phenomenon, which is what the equations of physics are telling you, that is behind what's happening. Well, that's a proven, clearly wrong starting point for science. For a science that of what you can measure, fine, but there is more to life, to existence than what you can measure. And we have to start there because we know, for example, that we cannot measure the love that we feel. Oh, well, then it's epiphenomenal. It doesn't exist. But so what you know from within, you determine. You say that it cannot exist simply because you cannot measure it. Come on, time
Yeah.
time to change the tune.
Yeah, exactly. Time changes, and it's what you described there. I mean, there's many points which you could go from, and I'd like to go more into then the sort of the dynamics which the dynamics which you put forward, i.e., like Seities and all of that. But what you described there, is that to you? How do you say the quagmire that I mean, I'm not by any means well versed in quantum physics, but my as a sort of somewhat of a interested layperson, my understanding is that it's in a bit of a quagmire. You know, there's many different theories put forward to try and explain it, and like you've just described, even if you spent 5 years, you know, you sort of like, well, where are we? Well, you know, whereas what you're describing and what your work describes is, well, if we acknowledge consciousness, then we have a parsimonious, way to make sense out of quantum physics, which your work really sort of what you've just described there does well. And I suppose, do you see, is that why perhaps, well, quantum physics was received, or how do you say, discovered, like you said, in a period of time in a zeitgeist which was extremely materialistic. You know, there was logical positivism going on, and so this idea that consciousness was even part of the picture was just not considered. However, interestingly, some of the early, like Heisenberg, I don't know if it was Heisenberg, but like Planck and some of these, physicists, I'm pretty sure they actually, spoke about, consciousness is fundamental and that, we can't get behind it. And
Yeah.
yet it seems to be that just hasn't picked up or carried on. But anyway, yeah, your work, like you've just described there, speaks about the fact that so quantum states are a representation of consciousness,
Of a conscious experience, yeah,
of a,
which of
which,
course
yeah,
require is what consciousness does, it gives you a
yeah,
conscious experience, yeah.
yeah. And would you say it's a representation? So because you speak about seities, so you've spoken about the one, and quantum, the quantum field being a sort of a conscious field. Though, for example, yourself and myself, right? Evidently, we are separable in some sense. And under your sort of framework, that would be because we are different seities. Would that be right?
Yeah, well, before I go there, I think I did not yet explain free will. As
Oh
far
yeah.
as science is concerned, most scientists believe that free will does not exist. Okay, and of course that's also because they use mathematics, and mathematics is supposed to give you the answers. But in fact, the mathematics of quantum physics does not give you the answer. Because the answer, if we were material things, would be the state. You should know the state that is next in some kind of experiment. But with quantum physics, with quantum systems, the quantum theory does not give you the next state. It gives you only all the probabilities of all the possibilities in which that particle, for example, may manifest in the next state. And so this is completely different in what classical physics does. Classical physics describes an object that remains the same object in its in its trajectory and so on, and describes what happens to the object, which is essentially the object must exist in space and time and move in space and time. Particles don't exist in space and time until you measure them. They are not objects. And everybody now agrees in quantum physics, that study quantum field theory, understand that a particle like an electron, for example, is not an object, is a state of a field. It's like a wave of the sea. The wave of the sea cannot exist if there is no sea.
Mm.
It is an emanation of the sea. The electron is an emanation of the field of electrons. Ontology is in the field, not in its emanations. So an electron, the properties of electrons, therefore, are properties of the field. They're not property because the electron doesn't exist as an entity in itself, is inseparable from the field. And the problem with quantum physics is that, for example, if you study an electron, the motion of an electron, you cannot tell, you can only tell how you prepare the electron, and then you cannot tell what happens between the preparation and the measure. There is nothing in space and time. Cannot be anything in space and time moving from the preparation to the measurement. Because there are experiments in which you show that if you change something, you change your mind or what you're measuring, there could not have been an electron moving in space and time because what happens only depends on the instant that you do the measurement. And so will take too long to explain it step by step. But the point is that the electron as an object doesn't exist. It's a state of a field, and the state will not manifest itself until that field interacts with the field of the instrument. So only when there is that interaction, there will be a manifestation in space and time. So now the electron will appear, you think that it appears, but in reality, you don't see the electron. You see the effect of the electron on the instrument that manifests eventually a light that goes on or a dial that moves or whatever. But what you see is only classical information. You see only bits. You do not see quantum bits. Quantum bits cannot be seen. So this much every physicist will agree, but they cannot explain why is that. And the quantum physics can only tell you the probability where you could find the electron when you make a measurement. It will not tell you where the electron will be found by the instrument. Can only give you probabilities, not the actual state. How do you get from probability to the actual state? That is an unsolved problem of quantum physics. It's called the collapse of the wave function. It is called the measurement problem. Nobody has ever figured out what happens. Basically, what happens is that from these probabilities, you go to an actuality, and that is a purely random event. Purely random event. And it is not algorithmic. It is proven that it's not algorithmic. There are no hidden variables in this transformation. So it cannot be computed in any form. That is where that in this new theory with Dariano, that's a decision of free will of the field that you are observing. So if you are observing an electron, who is making the decision of what to show, where to show the electron that you measure? The field that you're measuring is making that decision, not the consciousness of the observer, but the consciousness of the field that you are observing, that the instrument is observing.
Oh, okay.
You see,
Yeah.
completely different than the original idea of, von Neumann, Wigner, even Planck would agree with that idea, basically that the consciousness of the observer collapses the wave function. No, is not. It's the decision of free will of the field that is observed by the instrument in its interaction with the instrument that decides what to manifest. That's the new theory.
Yes. And you only get that where you assume that, well, I suppose you'll never get that under a materialist sort of belief, because the electron is a thing, and it is, yeah, it's as it is, it's just this sort of
It
inert
is a state of
thing.
the field. So who else can decide where to show the state of the field? The field, right? I mean, why
Mm,
would
mm,
you decide for the field?
mm, mm.
And it is
And
a free, it cannot be, free will cannot have any law behind it. It must be random, non-algorithmic. That's
mm.
exactly what happens. But it's random to you, the observer. But as far as the field is concerned, for the field is a certainty
Yeah,
after it made the decision. There is no randomness there. It decided to show it there, period.
yeah.
So the randomness cannot be a feature of reality, it's a feature of the observer of reality that doesn't know what the fields are going to manifest simply because they have free will. The fields have free will.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I suppose this touches on the, well, in a sense, the kind of the panpsychism, and also I think it's what you're speaking there, because obviously in panpsychism there's this kind of idea of the combination problem, whereas your panpsychism sort of doesn't have that, because it's speaking about fields and how particles, electrons are merely like waves of a field, and so you then don't have a combination problem. Is that right?
Yeah, the combination problem is a problem of panpsychist theories, which are classical. There is no, to my knowledge, the first panpsychist theory of consciousness and free will is the one with Dariano, which I and Dariano have made.
Yeah,
But that's quantum panpsychism, not classical panpsychism.
yeah.
That's where it works. It works because in the combination problem is it is possible in quantum physics because the superposition of states create a new state which is much more than the sum of the states. When you, for example, I mean, just to give it an example that you can kind of get it. When an electron combines with a proton, the property of the atom of hydrogen, which is the combination of the two, are not the sum of the properties of the proton and the electron. They're completely different properties.
Mhm.
And they arise, they are quantum properties. We then can detect them as properties in space and time, some of them. But for example, the spin, which is the direction of the magnetic moment of the electron, for example, when we measure it, no matter in which direction we measure, we find 1 or 0. We cannot know the direction unless we have prepared that electron in that particular direction. So only in that case we know it, but we know it because we prepare it. So, we prepare it that way, so we know it, but we are the one that caused that spin to be that way. But if I give you an electron with a spin that I prepare, and I ask you to tell me where that's, what that direction is, you will not be able to find out because you I don't tell you the direction in which it is. So you measure in any direction in which you measure it, you will find 1 or 0.
Hmm.
You can only find that direction if I give you thousands of electrons, all prepared the same way, and you are smart enough to figure out a way to do measurements in which you are zeroing in by doing many measurements, thousands of measurements of this of similar, similarly prepared electrons. Then you can tell me close enough to what I already knew because I prepared it.
And so, okay, and so then with and what we're referring to here is its name is quantum. Is it quantum information panpsychism, right?
Yeah, it's quantum panpsychism, and it's based on quantum information. It's based on quantum information as opposed
Oh,
to
okay, yeah,
classical
yeah.
information like classical panpsychism. In the classical reality, the property of the whole are the sum of the property of the parts. That's it. There is nothing more. You cannot have a whole that is more than the sum of the parts. That's what classical physics is about.
Yeah.
Because a classical physics is reductionist. There are parts that interact, and whatever the description of the whole is the description, comes out from the description of the parts.
Yes. And so then, okay, so you speak about the one, and you spoke about fields. So, and then I suppose we are like, in a sense, a particle is an emanation or a fluctuation of a field or something, right? It's that's what it is.
Wait a
So,
second. What do you mean we? I am not the body. I am not the body. I am a quantum field that controls the body that I think I am before
yes.
I figure it out that I'm not the body.
Yes. Okay. So are there different? I suppose my question is: are there different quantum fields?
Of course, of course. But even in even in quantum physics, every particle has its own quantum field, right?
Right. 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 Right.
But then when for example the quantum field of electrons combine with the quantum field of protons, we are saying there is a new field, which is the quantum field of atoms of hydrogens.
I see.
You see, so which is now what is kind of, this has never been said this way by physicists, but in fact, it has to make sense because the because the fact that the electron is a state of the field of electrons, inseparable from the field, and so is the proton. Already the proton is considered a field, even if strictly speaking it's not a field, because a proton is the combination of two types of quarks, and
Mm.
gluons. So it's that it's not it's not a simple field, but it's very often the proton is treated as if it was a property of the field of protons, which is not the case. But in any event, the point is that when you combine the protons and electrons, you create something that, if it was not a field, remains still connected to the field of electrons and the field of protons. So there has to be, but when you think about it, a whole atom of hydrogen, not when it's broken apart, but when it's is in its own coherence, must be a state of another field, because otherwise, how could the two fields, because the electron cannot be separated from the field of electrons, and the proton cannot be separated to create something which is separate from the fields, which is the way it's treated. No, there has to be a field. But that's not something that physicists will tell you right now, so they will have to think it through, and I arrive to the same conclusion. But the point that I'm making is that this way, the combination problem creates a field without destroying the field of electrons or the field of protons. But it is a new creation. It's a new, the field of atoms of hydrogen with properties which are completely different than the properties of electrons and the properties of protons. Not the sum of the two, is some completely new properties must have a field underlined. There must be, because also the atom of hydrogen behave exactly like, if you take atoms of hydrogen, you throw it through a double slit, it behaves like a quantum system. It doesn't behave like a classical system.
Mhm. And so then, yeah, protons or sort of atoms and stuff have a form of experience. There's some form of experience to them,
Yeah,
or the
but
field rather. But
the experience
the
is a
field
property of the field. It's not a
of the
property
field. Yeah, 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 of the
of
field.
its states. You see?
Yes, yeah, sorry, yeah, yeah, yeah. That
Yeah,
makes sense.
the
Yeah.
experience, my experience is not in the even my experience. I'm a lot, huge number, 10 to the probably 29 electrons and protons, whatever, right? So I mean, huge numbers. Even my experience is not in my body, is in the field of which that controls my body. So,
And
in
so,
other words, there are three levels of reality in this theory, three levels of reality. There is the quantum reality, quantum fields, whose state represents my experience. Okay, so the
mhm,
qualia are represented by a quantum state. But for me, my experience goes beyond its representation. The representation of an experience is not the experience.
mhm,
Okay, and in fact, the quantum state is made of components, is a vector, is a unit vector that is made of components which are probabilities, probability amplitudes. Okay, so it doesn't describe an object or anything, it describes probability of something that might happen. And for whatever happens, you need to take that quantum state and multiply it by a operator, and the operator is a matrix whose components are typically complex numbers. So wow, and only when you do that, what do you find? You find the probabilities of measuring the quantity that corresponds to that operator that you used. But
mhm,
you don't find the actual state, the actual thing. The actual thing that is something that it goes beyond physics is the collapse of the wave function that nobody knows where it comes from. That's a decision of free will of the field that you're measuring, according to this new theory. And
yeah,
it can only be so because that quantum field is conscious, because free will without consciousness makes no sense. In other words,
yes,
for me to exercise free will, I must know what I want. I must know my intention, right? So I must be conscious to have free will, for an action to be called free will. And in fact, without consciousness, that action that I call free will must have the properties of the collapse of the wave function, which is randomness and non-algorithmic. And that's exactly what physicists say. Collapse of the wave function is random and algorithmic, but we don't know what it is. Well, Dariano and I are saying, once you accept that the quantum field is conscious because its state has the same properties of a conscious experience, then the collapse of the wave function is clearly a decision of free will of that field. And the entire, misunderstanding about quantum physics is gone, because now it makes sense. It is exactly what we
mm,
it
mm.
is
It's
exactly
so,
what we do.
and it's so strange to me because it does, like you say, it makes sense of it, and And so why is there why is it, yeah, there's such a resistance to accepting it? And why is, like you said before, this strange, I don't know where it comes from, denial of consciousness, to the point where people like this eliminativism and,
Well,
illusionism.
I don't know for a fact, but certainly, if there is free will, and if physics is basically, you know, basically physics cannot tell you what will happen, then where is the power of the physicists and know everything, right? I mean, I think is a deep down the need of power and control
Yeah,
is the
yeah,
one that refuses to see the obvious, because the need of power and control must have something that behaves like we say, because we are powerful, we will have control. But that is not true. The universe is not, it doesn't do that, doesn't obey physicists. Sorry about
yes.
it.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, and it comes back to that idea of like scientism, and how whilst science, yeah, I think you've obviously observed this, and I think probably quite a lot of people observe it. A lot of scientists or science acts under the how do you say, idea of humility, but actually there is this sort of underlying tone of like, no, we can and we will know everything, and you know we will do anything to make sure that we do. Um, yeah, and it makes me think of Nietzsche's
I
will to
mean,
power,
even
really. Yeah.
Einstein was a determinist. He wanted, he never accepted quantum physics, uh,
Mm,
uh, uh, because he thought that the universe is deterministic. But if universe is deterministic, then we shouldn't be conscious. What is conscious? What has consciousness to do? I mean, if the next in a deterministic system, the next state is certain. It's not debatable. It's determined entirely by the equations of physics.
mm. So yeah, exactly. So what's the point of because then I
So there
suppose,
is no reason for us to be conscious. But that's
yeah,
exactly what the physicists are saying. It's an epiphenomenon. Conscious is an epiphenomenon. So you deny the evidence in order to protect what you want, which is a world
yeah,
without
yeah, yeah.
control.
And the interesting thing is, even with the kind of the epiphenomena thing, it's like they say it's an epiphenomena, but then they fall because then they say, well, okay, we have this gap, this hard problem of consciousness, which is it cannot be, it's incommensurable. You cannot,
Yeah, but not everybody has accepted that there is a hard problem. I mean, the people that say it's an epiphenomenon have decided that it's not even a phenomenon. So who cares if it's hard or not?
it's really, yeah,
I
it is
mean,
interesting.
the scientism doesn't give value of truth value to the existence of consciousness. I mean, basically, it's the brain that decides and informs this silly thing called consciousness, which is not even a phenomenon, of the decision that he has made, and this silly thing thinks that he had made the decision. That's how they explain reality. They explain consciousness by an epiphenomenon. The real phenomenon is the decision that was made mechanically by the brain. And
Mm,
then, somehow you are informed, your consciousness, whatever that is, but who cares, because it's an epiphenomenon anyway. But consciousness somehow thinks that it has made that decision. I mean, that's how we have eliminated humanity, our human nature from the face of the reality by this, you know, silly, simple decision. But they tell you that this experiment of Libet has shown that in fact, this is what happens. That's not true at all. It's
yeah,
a,
yeah, yeah,
it's a it's a supposition. The experiment is made in such a way that you cannot discriminate those situations. So I mean, it's just not right. So, so
yeah.
and there are subtle things, and it takes a lot of thinking and experimenting to kind of understand that it is so. But that's what is obviously clear, because we know that we're conscious, and also we know that only because
Um,
of our consciousness we can understand
I
What,
was going to
what
say,
you,
yeah. In fact, you have to have. There has to be it in order for symbols to make sense, for there to be
yeah,
understanding.
but you know, information in physics is defined the same way.
Mm,
Meaning is epiphenomenal for physics because it doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is the probability of a symbol manifesting. In the case of technology, you know, because you know, classical information was defined by Shannon in
mm,
1948 as the probability, you know, a function of the probability that a symbol might manifest in a sequence of symbols. And the higher the probability, the less information there is in that symbol, and vice versa. You know, the less the this the lower the probability that a symbol might manifest, the more information is contained in that symbol. That's how information has been defined, independent of of the meaning of the symbol. For example, if you do not know German, the probability that a certain word appears in German, okay, you recognize the word even if you don't understand it, okay. So if Lieben, you know, is, you know, you see that you test, you know, measure that the probability of that word, then you know the information of that word even if it means nothing to you. You see?
mm.
And physicists have extended that, the idea of information, to an event, not a symbol, an event that happens. You know, an event is something that happens. What is the probability of that something happening? The same, the co-logarithm of that probability is the information carried by that event. That's it. No meaning to that event. No meaning required. So, and it's exactly the same thing, the consciousness. But you know what? What is probability? What is probability?
Mm,
Probability is not a physical thing. Probability is a concept of consciousness, because it's
mm,
only consciousness that wants to predict what might happen in the future when it doesn't have enough information to make that prediction. But if we're not conscious and the next state is certain, why should probability exist? It cannot exist. And in fact,
mm,
it doesn't exist.
mm.
It is because we are conscious that we have the concept of probability. So probability is in the definition of information and in the definition of consciousness. Yeah, because you need consciousness to have this concept of probability. And that's why
Right, and
quantum physics is all about consciousness in a sense, because it can only tell you the probabilities. It can only tell you what you can know about reality, not what you will, not what reality will do. It will tell you only what you can know about reality, which are probabilities,
mhm.
not the event that will happen. That's the, because of the, you know, measurement problem, which is the inability to understand the collapse of the wave function. Not understand it. I mean, we understand that it must be there, but it's not part of physics. It's part of something
Mm,
else.
yeah. Okay, and then just to be clear as well, because we've mentioned the body and space time and space, well, it's space and time. So is it what you're saying basically to the evolution of the objective sort of what we call the objective physical universe is merely this, it's the kind of the symbolic correlate of the self-knowing of all the interacting seities. Is that what it is? Is that what does it, or is it just a projection of of the field of the seity? How do you describe, this universe and the fact that we both sort of um, share some kind of landscape or symbolic space.
Yeah, the way I explain then, uh, first of all, I have not introduced the concept of Seities for people that haven't read the book. So Seities is simply a quantum field that is conscious and has free will. So I use the word Seities to define a quantum field that, however, is conscious and has free will, because the quantum fields of physics are not conscious, don't have free will. So it's just a word that allows to express something that is not the foundational concept, but it uses the foundational concept plus something, which is the consciousness and free will. So a Seities is simply a quantum field, which is consciousness and free will. So it can have an experience, can make decisions, and so on. Then it is the quantum field that creates symbols to express the meaning of what the experience is. So now, what is the meaning? Okay, that I haven't described yet. So qualia is the sensations and feelings that are the carriers of meaning. So, for example, the love that I feel, has some meaning, some of which I understand, some of which I do not. And so I'm invited to understand. So I know that I don't know, and I'm invited to know more about it. But the point is that what is it? What is the meaning? Well, the meaning is the fact that there is comprehension. Comprehension is a process entirely within the quantum field. It's not a process that involves space and time, or, entirely within the quantum field, that goes from qualia to meaning. The meaning of that qualia, comprehension, is, and what, in terms of quantum physics, how could you conceive of comprehension? Comprehension are new connections that you can make between what you knew before. Is what allows you to say, now I got it. You were thinking, because you were understanding everything, and you had all these pieces disconnected. Now, all of a sudden, comprehension connects these pieces into a new whole, which you say, wow, I understand it. I know it. I got it. That's what comprehension does. Comprehensions connect. Those connections within the quantum fields are what quantum entanglement are new correlation between pieces that are formed within this field.
Right. And so then space-time is a way, it's like an interface
But you
for...
see, space, time, matter, and energy, the way physicists think about and talk about, which is basically those are the elements of general relativity, in which space, time, matter, and energy are connected together at the macroscopic level. That's what general relativity of Einstein does. Those concepts, which are purely physical concepts, in this new theory must be reframed into a complete as aspects of the self-knowing of one, because we start with the self-knowing of one. So space, for example, could be the memory of the experience of one. The long-term memory of the experience of one is what we call space. I'm not saying that it is. I'm saying, just to give you an idea of what I'm meaning by saying that if you start with what is self-knowing, then everything physical must be reconduced to aspects of self-knowing.
Yeah.
And and time the same, and has to be explaining in those terms. And that's the work that is ahead of us, if we accept this different starting point, where science, where there is an inner reality, there is an outer reality. An inner reality which is semantic, made of meaning, and the outer reality which is made of symbols. But of course, also that makes sense to us, because for us, information without meaning is not even information. I mean, I want, when I use words to talk to you, I'm not conveying words devoid of meaning. I'm conveying words that are interpreting the best way I can the meaning that I have within my own experience. And I use words to convey to you meaning. Now, you may not be able to get the meaning that I want to convey to you. In fact, if you don't have enough meaning similar to mine, you will not understand my words.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's interesting as well because this has just come to my mind actually. You often hear about when people take psychedelics, they will often come finish once they've taken them, they will report, and maybe as well very similar with mystical experiences, but they will say, I don't have the language, it's very difficult to speak about it. And it's because what you're saying, they've had they've experienced qualia or states of consciousness, which they don't feel it's not sort of translatable almost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Uh,
That
but
symbols won't do
but
it
you don't
justice
even need to go
almost.
that far. Just if I
Yeah, like
taste
love.
a mango and you never tasted one or
Yes,
anything
yes.
similar to a mango, and I describe to you the taste of mango, you will not be able to understand what I'm talking about. But if
Yeah.
I give you a little piece of mango, right after you say, wow, I got it. And
Yeah,
now,
yeah, yeah,
now you
yeah.
understand what I was saying before, which before you couldn't understand it. I mean, you could understand it intellectually, but not by recreating the experience. See, we understand because we experience. To understand your experience, I must recreate within me the same experience that you have, not the symbols, the
Yeah.
experience. The
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
essence of
yeah.
who we are is the experience, the conscious experience.
Well, yeah, it's everything, isn't it? I mean,
Of course,
it's
that's
everything.
what Planck had it right. I mean, he understood it perfectly. He said, we, you know, we cannot get behind consciousness.
Mm.
Consciousness is fundamental. We have to start there, meaning it must be a postulate. That's what he said, in other words.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
as you know, after you understand something, you realize that other people have said what you understood, but the day before you didn't understand. In other words, I read Planck, but it took me, quite a few years after arriving at the conclusion that I had to start with consciousness and free will as a postulate.
Mm.
It's simply because Planck never said you have to have a postulate. He simply, explained. He said effectively the same thing that I'm saying myself
Yes.
now, but he didn't say it in those words.
Yeah.
And perhaps even if he said it in those words, I would not have understood then, because now I understood. What I'm saying is because through a reasoning process that help the understanding, because the
Mm.
reasoning process can help understanding, meaning making those connections, which are quantum connections, those things that allow me to say, I got it now.
Yeah.
So, but when you get it, you can explain it. If you don't get it, you cannot explain it. You simply repeat what you heard.
Yes, yes. This is what Schopenhauer said this, he said, yeah, all sort of concepts, they have to be rooted fundamentally, they have to be rooted at some level in perception, in
Yeah,
the understanding. You have to
yeah,
be in the understanding.
yeah,
Um, yeah. Um, and Yeah, and you say, for example, that say, I think this is, yeah, this quote's verbatim. So you say only Seities can evolve the brains that properly supervised can then create the mathematics that explain the symbolic reality they created in. It makes no sense to think that Seities designed the universe starting from maths. In this model, they started communicating with each other, following their own nature, and evolved the universe that reflected that nature. Mathematics could much later describe the self-consistency of the observable reality for the simple reason for that a universe exists, it must be logically self-consistent. And it's interesting because to me that very much, I don't know if you've read him or given much thought, but to me it also makes it, how sorry, it echoes Jung and his idea of sort of archetypes and stuff, and that there must be an ordering principle uh, which exists beyond us for us to be able to make sense out of things.
yeah. I mean, if one was self-contradictory, it would have different pieces that wouldn't allow one to have unity. Unity means that there cannot be anything that can be, you cannot excise a part from the whole.
Mm,
So one is everything within one is interconnected. And
mm,
so there cannot be there cannot be true and false in the sense that there is a very separate, like a wall that separates what is true and what is false. There has to be something which is true and false at the same time, which is in fact, that's what Goethe actually found out. And you can choose one or the other, and both are true. Where logically false, for example, if you start from the point of view of Euclidean geometry, a geometry in which the straight lines converge is incoherent, but that exists too. That's called Riemannian geometry, right? So there are geometries where lines that are supposed to go straight, parallel, can actually diverge or converge, because that postulate is both true and false. You can choose which way to go, but if you go that way, one way, it will be in contradiction with the other way. But because both are true, then there must exist reality in which true and false cannot be separated.
right, right,
You see,
right,
both can exist,
right, right, right.
but true and false within the logic positivism is that the false cannot exist. It must be out.
I see. Yeah, yeah. Um,
So that's how one knows itself, in fact, by exploring this, is allness, which is not made of separable part. Exploring its allness in ways in which then, this is apparently is contradictory, locally contradictory, but then must join somehow somewhere else with something, so that there is no separation. You cannot take that world that you are described and take it out of one
yeah,
without, without disconnecting something. I mean, everything must be connected. So something that is true and false, both true and false here, you know, and therefore is disconnected here, must connect somewhere else. Otherwise,
right.
otherwise you can take it out. It becomes a part, a separable part. But
Yeah, and
that's why the fundamental concepts that we use when we begin to try to understand the nature of one, they cannot be separated. They have to be connected. So we cannot talk about freedom without talking of will, without talking of consciousness, without talking of something else, because they're all part of a more sophisticated reality that we cannot define by taking boxes that are separate. But so all, like the objects that the electrons that we consider separate from the field, now we understand that that's not true. They are states of the field. But what is a state of the field? Well, we probably need another 100 years to understand exactly what a state of the field is. It's another word to say something like a wave that cannot be taken out of the sea.
um, and well, yeah, I was going to say something else, but I don't want to forget this. So I'm just curious. So with all of this, and since you started, like, you speak, you're writing about it, you're talking about it a lot. Have you encountered, obviously, this Dariano, but have you met any physicists? I'm wondering, maybe neuroscientists, but I'm thinking of physicists mainly as well, who have now listened and heard this and gone, oh, actually, maybe, or is it? Have you not? Is it slow?
No, it's a very slow process. I mean, look, just this is as baffling as the concept of entanglement was early on. Remember, the entanglement was a mathematical property of the mathematics of quantum systems, that was the first to notice that was Schrödinger in 1935. And in 1935, same year, Einstein wrote a paper with a couple of other physicists. It's called the EPR paradox paper that says that because of entanglement, quantum physics could not be complete as a theory. There must be some hidden variable somewhere. There must be something else must be there, because it is describing a non-local universe, and non-local universe means something that cannot exist, according to Einstein, and according to most physicists. So that remain as a kind of as a kind of an open question for 50 years until the first experiments could be made. Alain Aspect, French, that got the Nobel Prize recently, together with another couple of physicists for entanglement, is the one that made the first crucial experiment that showed that there is entanglement. And so then all hell broke loose because nobody wanted an entanglement. And so, oh, you made a mistake, you're assuming this, blah, 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 blah. We went on for another 30 years. And I think the last experiment was in 2014, and that closed all the loopholes that were raised by physicists. And after that, everybody had to agree there is entanglement. Damn it, damn it, there is entanglement. That's it. Okay,
It
so
takes time, yeah.
here I'm Dariano and I are talking about something that is, it cannot possibly be, but they cannot find anything to say we are wrong at this point, that they can say, well, that's impossible, right? But so they cannot attack us, until they have some kind of, more coherent, coherent way of discussing this. And so far, they haven't come forth with any valid objection other than I don't know, I don't believe it, or whatever. Yeah, and in the meantime, we need, as scientists, we need to prove experimentally that make, because this theory makes predictions, and for example, he predicts that plants are conscious, for example. So,
Mm.
and most theory of consciousness, even if it is epiphenomenal, they require a brain. So if we can make experiments where we prove that a plant is conscious, then we have falsified all the theories of consciousness that presume that consciousness is a phenomenon, epiphenomenal, or phenomenon of the brain. And so those are the things that we got to do. And I'm already starting in that direction to promote and support through the foundation experiments that are proving, supporting our theory and disproving other theories, theories that says otherwise. But there is already a lot of evidence that near-death experiences, for example. How can a conscious being have those experiences? And there are hundreds of thousands of reports of that. How can those experiences exist if consciousness is a property of the brain? When the brain is dead, essentially, there's no electrical signals, it's clinically dead. The heart doesn't beat. And there are experiences like that are transformative on top of it. They are not just experience. No, they change the life of a person, like my first experience did. So they are the most meaningful experience of a lifetime, and those are supposed to happen to a body which is clinically dead.
Mm.
Come on, how can you explain that as consciousness is a property of the brain? At least the brain should function to have a conscious experience. But then out of body experiences, where the conscious is out of the body, you feel it out of the body, you know that it's out of the body, you report things that you experience through a body which is not your physical body, is a much more malleable body. You can, with your mind, you can shape it. It goes through the walls of the bedroom where you have this experience, for example. How is that possible? And on it goes. Our theory can explain those phenomena. No theory that I know of can explain it. Certainly not a classical theory. So, but like anything else, if we want to do science, you better be prepared to prove what you say, or not, or better, since it cannot be proven, directly, and not because of, of a fault of the theory, but simply because physics already is saying that a quantum field, a quantum state, is non-clonable. So physicists are saying, I cannot reproduce in the laboratory a quantum state. It cannot be reproduced. That's it.
Mm.
So, so stop saying that, if it cannot be reproduced in a laboratory, it doesn't exist, which is what 20, 30 years ago people were saying.
Mm. Yeah. So Federico, can we just take 30-second break?
Yeah, well, I mean, probably we could stop this conversation. I mean, we have been at it for what? For 2 hours now.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if we take.
No,
Do you have 10?
almost 2 hours.
Do you have? I know if could we go for another 10 minutes? I just have a couple
10 minutes, yeah,
questions.
that's fine.
But just this view, sort of the implications for it. Let's say someone were to kind of, in the same way in which it's changed your experience, but also I actually think, like you've touched on, to me anyway, your whilst the actual dynamics might and the language might be slightly different, i.e., for example, quantum fields and Seities and stuff like that. Actually, a lot of this is very much in alignment with, for example, the Upanishads, what that speaks about, like Brahman and Atman, and how we're like these sort of like the universe is within us. And actually, interestingly as well, you had a quote. Basically, what I'm talking about is like the sort of the spiritual consequences of it. And yeah, so you said there's a quote you have, which is reproduction is the fundamental property with which one created Seities in its own image and likeness. And that just really struck me, right? Because I can't remember I don't know if it was Christ who says it or if it's in the Bible, but this idea of that man is made in the image of God. And I'd always just sort of taken this to kind of like, I think, and a lot of people do, is this idea that, well, if we're made in the image of God, it's talking about the body. Whereas actually it's like, no, what if actually what is meant by it is we're made in the image of God as, from the sort of experiential aspect,
Is the
which is,
field.
yeah, yeah.
One creates one in quantum, also in physics. In physics, there is the idea of a unified field, though nobody's been able to find the equation to describe the unified field yet, but there is this idea of the unified fields out of which the various quantum fields emerge, okay? So it's the same idea that I'm using here. So those quantum fields are sons of one, are manifestation, are parts whole. I call them part whole. Each is
Mm,
a part whole. It has all the foundational properties of one, of the whole, and yet they are a part because there are many of them, but there are many of them. But look, even the cells of my body are parts whole of the body because each cell has the genome of the egg that is a cell that created all the other cells. And so with the same genome, so the same genome of the egg that created the entire organism is contained in each of its parts of its cells. So each cell has potentially the knowledge of the whole that it can manifest throughout its life. That's why there is epigenetics. And
Yeah.
epigenetics was considered anathema, 30 years ago. And now everybody say, oh yeah, epigenetics, there is epigenetics. I mean, there's another dogma that was, thrown away from
Mm.
scientism. So the same thing is here. We are parts all of one, but we are not the body. And yet the
Mm.
body, which is a quantum classical system, is built in the same way that we as fields come from one. So that's life. Life is this property that creates parts whole out of itself.
Yes. Yes. And again,
And a
that speaks.
computer is not a part whole of another computer. You can copy the program, but you cannot copy the hardware. Have you ever seen a computer give birth to another computer that was built by the computer within itself? Have you seen that?
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
these engineers, they talk about it as if because you can copy the program, then it's like reproduction. No, sir. Reproduction is both software and hardware. And you cannot even talk about software kind of, but you can talk about information. Certainly the genome is an informational system of a complexity and grandeur that we haven't even, we don't know, we don't understand yet. We think that it's just
Yeah.
atoms and molecules, or the code. The code is something which is on top of something which goes beyond codes. And that's why the genome, the various aspects of the genome can copy themselves, and they can work their way. They are actually, the the bit to be manipulated, the bit must go to the central processing unit. Okay, because the memory simply has the bits there, sitting there, static, and the change occurs in the CPU. Not so in the genome. The genome can kind of, is acting its own thing and moving and unraveling, all this stuff. Come on.
Yeah, yeah. And like you said about DNA and gene, yeah, there is a lot we don't understand. It's like dark. There's like, what is it now? It's dark or dark DNA, and parts of it which we're not particularly
I
even
mean,
aware of.
we're just starting to ask questions that before we
Mm,
didn't even want to ask. So
mm,
it's all to be discovered. I mean,
mm,
we don't understand how life works. We A cell is quantum and classical. It has been studied as biochemistry until now. Come on. It is a quantum system of a sophistication that we haven't even imagined yet.
mm.
This is what's going on. And so one more dogma to throw away. We're not classical systems. We are quantum and classical bodies. Computers are classical. They
Yes,
depend
and
on the definition of bit.
yeah, and
And
this
the
is, and
bit,
that's
we are the one conscious being that define the bit. It doesn't exist inside the computer. Open the computer, there are no bits there.
yeah,
We have constructed a computer in such a way that this coherence in the definition of what is information is maintained at least within certain environmental conditions. If you raise the temperature to 100 degrees, the computer will not work anymore. It will stop working because a circuit will not recognize one or zero. Another one will recognize zero when it should be one, and everything goes into chaos.
yeah, yeah, and and that idea of the quantum and the classical, and that how we are sort of both in a sense, makes me think of a quote. I think it's in the St. Francis of Assisi prayer, which is, "It is by dying we find eternal life." And to me, what that speaks of, and it can only be experienced, but it's the recognition of, yeah, that the sort of the death of the classical, the death of the body, or what's referred to as the ego, and yet there remains experience, which maybe is the quantum. So like the death of the classical and the recognition of the quantum, the deeper, space, and because I think you said in
Look, George, I mean, I cannot stop saying this because it's so powerful. 25 years ago, the Tao says, Tao Te Ching, uh, I, you know, I paraphrasing a bit because I don't remember exactly the English translation, but it's something like this. The Tao that can be told or that can be said is not the eternal Tao.
yeah,
Okay, so the Tao that cannot be told is the quantum state.
yeah,
And what can be told is not the eternal Tao. In other words, they already understood that there is something that goes beyond symbolic stuff. The
yeah,
symbols can be told, but not the meaning of the symbol. And they
yeah,
understood that. Of course, when I read it, it rang true, but now I can actually explain why it has to be that way. This theory, the Tao is the quantum state, and the quantum state cannot be reproduced.
yeah, yeah. And like you said, they knew about
If
this a
it
long
can be
time ago.
reproduced, it's not the Tao.
Yeah. And like you said, they back a long time ago, certain people became aware of this, that that there is a deeper reality, and that the classical world is a translation of it, but it's a portion. It only translates a portion of it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
But how could they have known that if you need science to know, if you need math
Mm,
to know?
mm,
They know it because consciousness can know by itself. You don't need math. Math is a elaboration, is what can be told. And to be able to do that, you need to be conscious. You need to create that math so that it tells you what you already have understood through consciousness, through
mm.
conscious experiences.
Yeah, through consciousness. Yeah, you can't. It is very odd, isn't it? Why people, they seem to forget that matter. You talk about like people who are materialists, and they say matter is the only thing that exists. Forgetting though that matter only exists in the bed of in the with through consciousness. It's
Of
if
course,
it's a
but
represent. Yeah.
math is not ontology. Math is a representation of something.
Right.
That's another thing. There are many physicists think that the theory of reality is reality. No, a
Mm,
theory of reality is not reality. It's just a representation of reality. The map is not the territory. Reality
yeah.
is the territory that can only be known directly through a lived experience. A lived experience. That's the only, has to be.
Yeah, so there's a couple things to just finish off. You said on a podcast once before, I think you spoke about this. I think it was the Third Eye Drop podcast where you sort of alluded to death and how I don't know if you said you're not afraid of it, but that you almost like are curious or something. So which speaks to so this sense that there is yeah
Well, I mean, to me, death is when the body stops functioning because the body is constructed not to last forever because we want to have an experience here in this reality. But, so it has to die because we're not the body. So, but once we identify with the body, we believe to be the body, then we don't want the body to die because otherwise we die. No, we don't die. We don't go anywhere. We never were in the body. So when the body dies, you simply stop looking at the signals produced by the body and you look around yourself and oh my god, I'm here. Now you realize that I was always here in this vaster reality where I'm in touch with all kinds of other stuff that I forgot about it because I was so captivated by looking at the body as I am the body. But that is part of the experience, part of the game that we have created ourselves in order to know ourselves deeper. That's so life is the physical life is that kind of thing. But the real life is the fact that we can know ourselves even without a body. Though we need symbols to communicate because we cannot communicate directly what we feel. That's even quantum physics prohibits that. But we know by experience that we cannot do that. I cannot give you, transfer to you the love that I feel. It's a property of who I am that
Mm,
cannot be cannot be taken away in the way. And the only way that I can express it is through symbolica, through symbols that are shareable. In other words, because if I could send it to you, I would reproduce it. I would violate the no cloning theorem. But the no cloning theorem is not the reason why I cannot do it to you. It's because the deeper reason is that conscious being, this field cannot do that. Therefore, the mathematics must reflect those properties. You see, otherwise we always go to try to explain our consciousness with mathematics, when in fact it's mathematics that can be explained only with the existence of consciousness, with the existence of understanding, with the existing, because only if we understand can we find a model that reflects our understanding. But the
mm,
understanding comes before the model.
mm. And then lastly, when you see maybe on the news or when you're reading these people, I don't know, computer scientists or people speaking about, they say, oh, well, some people I think have already tried to say that AI is conscious. But when they say, what's your thought? What do you at this point, do you just sort of like chuckle? Is it just like, oh gosh, there's another one?
Well, I mean, it shows how you know how incomprehensible to people are these things, because not because they are incomprehensible, but because the scientism has brainwashed us into believing that those things don't exist. Because you go to school and you say intuition, don't believe that. Intuition is deceptive. Don't oh, feelings, they're bad. What is conscious? Oh, that's what makes you suffer. Don't worry about that. What? You see, and so if you are interested in solving problems, you kind of, you're not into this stuff to start with, because of your nature, then little by little you eliminate all of that, and all of a sudden you're left with the rational mind that goes through what rational minds do. You play the game of rational minds, and you think that's all that there is.
Mm,
And hopefully you will wake up sooner or later to a vaster reality in which rationality is only one aspect of reality, not reality. And that's where we are today. Most scientists and engineers are trained to, get away, move away from their deeper reality. And that's a crime against humanity, real humanity, because we are teaching and preaching that stuff doesn't exist. It's epiphenomenal.
mm,
So now we worry about having wars and everything else. Well, if you don't know that we are parts whole of one, so to know you, to know myself, I need to know you and the other like myself. We need to cooperate. We basically believe in this crazy, belief that the purpose of life is the survival of the fittest. Well, what are you talking about? What is the fittest? Oh, the fittest is the one that survives. Oh, okay. So the principle of life is the survival of the one that survives. That's a very powerful principle. Come on, you understand?
mm.
It's crazy. We have eliminated what makes us human, and then we pretend that we are right.
Yeah, it's I suppose one can only try and have faith that I
And
don't
if
know.
I'm wrong, I'll shoot you.
Yeah.
Whatever, right? I mean, come on. I mean, I'm fitter than you, so what the hell? I'm the one that survives because I pronounce myself fitter. There is no definition of what is fit.
Yeah,
No definition
yeah,
of what is fit. No
yeah.
objective definition. So, what is the fittest? The one who survives, and that's where the principle is stupid.
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
is
when you put it
is
like that, it's
is
true.
circular logic, like most physics is physics. Because we don't know what the thing is. What is energy?
Mm.
Or what creates motion? And what is motion? What is created by energy? Wow, wow.
Yeah.
There is more to it. I'm not, I'm not saying that it's a silly game. I'm saying that that game doesn't explain everything. It explains only the stuff that we can measure, the stuff that can be reduced to number. But there is stuff that cannot be reduced to numbers. Goes
Yeah.
beyond math, beyond the capacity of math to describe, to represent. And that's why the math of quantum physics represents a concept of consciousness that doesn't exist in reality, which is probability. And probability is not physical, does not exist, is a construction of a conscious being.
Well, we've covered quite a lot there. And yeah, I've really enjoyed talking, Federico, and I've really enjoyed your book. And for those again who have listened and enjoyed it, I know you've mentioned others, but this is the one I read, which is Irreducible. Um, though it sounds like you've got more coming out, or you've got another one
But
coming
there
out.
is another English book that came out in Italian first, was called Silicon. Silicon,
Mm,
from the invention of the microprocessor to the new science of consciousness. That's that book is available, has been available for a couple of years, and then the last one is only in Italian, just came out
yeah.
about 5 months ago, and that's Beyond the Invisible. And what is beyond the invisible? Oh my God! I mean, at the best, you should have said beyond the visible. Well, I'll tell you what is beyond the invisible. First of all, the invisible starts is qualia. It can only be seen by the owner, is the Tao. Actually, is only what the Tao is pointing at, which is the meaning. And
Yeah.
the meaning is beyond the invisible. So the qualia are invisible to anything except the owner. And beyond that invisible is the meaning, which is even deeper, which comes from qualia.
Yeah, and so that also will that come out in English at some
It
point?
will come out in English sometime, as I will translate it in English, and then
All
will
right,
come out.
yeah. Oh, well, I'll read that. Yeah, and yeah, don't ever lose your enthusiasm. It's infectious. It's yeah, no, it's amazing. It's great, and it's for someone like myself who's yeah, quite interested in. I'm not a physicist by any means, but well, by literally any means, but like very interested in sort of like spirituality and sort of psychology. Your theory, your framework, and then how you describe it, yeah, it marries up very well, and so it's yeah, it's been a joy to read and talk with you.
Very good. Likewise.